Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Let's get started. This occurred in 2017, during the height of Tinder's popularity. It was in every person I knew, hooking up, matching, and scrolling as if it were a game. The majority were more interested in temporary enjoyment than in true love. I'll admit I was curious. Despite my apprehension about dating apps, I decided to jump right in because of the excitement surrounding them. The issue was that I didn't know how to use it. Nothing. I therefore gave my friend a call. Samuel took great satisfaction in being an expert on dating apps. It seemed like a big event when I arrived at his house. Our common pals were already there, smiling like they were casting a reality show, with drinks in their hands. They started creating my profile from scratch, forced me to pose for photos, and argued about the best angles. Sam was the most excited of them all. "We're arranging a blind date for you," he said, looking through my phone's photos. "You need to relax, man. It's time to have a real night out at last." Sam insisted that I wear something that stood out, so I put on a form-fitting scarlet shirt that gave me confidence. He winked. The date was scheduled for Monday. I got there early and sat at a booth near the back, keeping an eye on the entrance. Every time the door opened, I would tense up, wondering if she had arrived. However, time passed, 5, 10, 15 minutes, and still no sign of her, at which point a guy walked in and headed straight toward me. The meeting spot was a pizza joint near my apartment. It sounded perfect and was low-key comfortable. He appeared unsure but resolute. "Are you Daniel?" I blinked as he stopped at my table and said, "Yeah," with a somewhat clumsy smile. "I'm Ashton, your date." I stared at him, totally confused. "Wait, what?" I thought I was meeting someone named Emily. He laughed tensely before taking out his phone and turning the screen in my direction. I felt a flood of shock and amazement come over me as I saw my profile and my photographs on an app named Grindr, not Tinder. "What the heck is this? They must have made you a profile here instead," I mumbled. Ashton shrugged, still grinning. I felt anger creep up my neck. As I muttered, "Sam, of course those bastards," I tried to remain composed as I told Ashton, "I think there's been a mistake." I wanted to storm back to his place and punch a hole through his wall. Maybe through his smug face, too. It must have seemed hilarious to my buddies to pull a practical joke on me. I sincerely apologize, however. Ashton's expression clouded. "Do you find this amusing?" His voice became abrasive and defensive. "I thought this was real when I came out here. I apologize, and I understand that," I tried to explain. His face contorted. "I didn't even know this wasn't me." Dropping his voice, he continued, "Then at least do me a favor. Make my time worthwhile. Join me in the restroom. That is how much you owe me." I felt sick to my stomach. I backed up a little and said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" He went closer, his eyes hardening, and said, "Look, I told you I'm not into guys. This whole thing is a joke. But not from me. I traveled this far. You think you can just lead someone on and walk away?" I exploded. "Ashton, get lost. I'm not gay, and I didn't ask for any of this." When he lunged at me, my instincts took over, and I punched him in the chest and ran out the door. When I got back to my apartment, I called Sam and the others repeatedly, but I got no answer. I could see them laughing uncontrollably, their phones on silent, and I was furious. It wasn't a joke, though. I needed answers. so I threw on a jacket and stormed out after an hour of stewing. I usually took a shortcut through a narrow alleyway between two buildings that were under construction because I knew it well and it saved time. As I turned into it, I heard footsteps behind me, and I looked over my shoulder. Ashton was back. "Jesus, leave me alone," I muttered, quickening my pace, but he didn't stop. Even worse, a new guy had joined him, a guy I had never seen before, and they were getting closer. My heart started pounding. I continued to walk, trying not to show fear, but I turned around when I heard the pace of their footsteps quicken. "Back off," I said, but before I could say anything more, the new guy slammed into me from behind, causing my head to jerk forward and slam against the brick wall. I was so stunned that I barely noticed the two of them, grabbing my arms and pinning me firmly against the wall. "Let me go," I shouted. My eyesight blurred, my nose throbbed, and I felt warm blood seeping down. They didn't. Ashton moved in front of me, his hands fumbling at my belt. "No, no, no." My entire body screamed in opposition, and I was more afraid than I had ever been in my life. "Please don't do this," I yelled, terror rising like violin. My throat as I fought, twisted, and tried to break free. The once familiar alleyway felt like a trap, and they weren't paying attention. I pleaded, my words tumbling out in a shaky breath. "I'll give you my wallet, my phone, anything you want." They didn't stop. Instead, they laughed not awkwardly, not nervously, but mockingly, darkly, coldly, inhumanly, the kind of laugh that makes your spine tingle with fear. Ashton moved closer, until I could feel his breath, with a low, repulsive voice that still makes my skin crawl. He whispered against my ear, "Calm down. It won't hurt." Then he laughed again, sick, gleeful. My belt finally came loose in his hands, and he yanked down my pants and underwear in one violent pull. My eyes widened in fear, realizing that I was completely exposed and vulnerable in a way I had never felt before. Were they really going to do this to me? I began kicking, thrashing, and doing anything to break free, but they were too stronger, and they kicked at my legs, slamming boots into my ankles until I fell to the ground with a dull thud. Before I could react, a blow landed directly in my face, causing my vision to go white and everything to blur. I believe it almost knocked me out, and the next thing I knew, Ashton's friend was sitting on my back, crushing me into the chilly pavement, holding me down. I was crying now, hysterically, desperately, and I screamed as loudly as I could, over and over, not even sure if any sound was coming out anymore, just raw animal terror pouring from my throat. Ashton was trying to grab my legs again, struggling to keep them still, and I was barely breathing and moving. It was the most horrifying, helpless moment of my life, and no nightmare had ever felt this real. I lay there for a moment, still trembling, still frozen, pants tangled around my ankles, crying, but not sure if it was from fear or relief or just complete emotional collapse. Then all of a sudden, something changed. Voices shouted. Men's voices shouted from somewhere beyond the alley. "Let him go." Footsteps pounded. Ashton muttered a curse, and then both men jumped off me. They ran, disappeared down the alley without another word, and turned to see two younger men, possibly in their late teens or early 20s, walking up with a man in his 50s. One of them was holding a length of pipe, and they all appeared breathless and wide-eyed. "Are you okay? Did they cause you pain?" One of the young men, who was crouched by me, asked. I shook my head, unable to speak, but then I noticed blood on my hand, my face throbbing, and I thought my nose might have been broken. "Let's get you to the police," the older man said, and I nodded silently, too overwhelmed to argue. At the station, I gave my statement as best I could, my voice cracking, and I kept pausing, but I told them everything. The police listened carefully, and those three men, who had only been strangers minutes before, waited with me the entire time. The stabbing pain made it difficult to focus. When one of the boys heard me screaming, He told his dad to stop the car and ran toward the alley. They saw what was happening and didn't hesitate to save me. I honestly don't know what I would have done if they hadn't arrived. I was emotionally and physically exhausted when I finally arrived home, and when I checked my phone, I saw dozens of missed calls. I didn't respond to any of my so-called friends because I couldn't, and I didn't even want to look at their names. Later that evening, they came to my apartment, probably expecting to laugh and ask about Emily, to check if the prank had worked. But when they saw my face, swollen, bruised, and with dried blood still on my shirt, everything about them changed. Jokes died in their throats, and the room fell silent. I approached Samuel, gave him a glare, and punched him in the nose. "Now we're even," I said. "Get out, all of you," he ordered firmly before turning and pointing to the door. As for Ashton and his friend, they were arrested later that week after being spotted on a nearby security camera, running out of the alley. They were both charged with assault and attempted rape and were sentenced to 3 years in prison. Although it didn't feel like enough, they left in silence. A few of them texted me later to apologize and say they didn't mean for any of this to happen, but I didn't reply. I haven't spoken to any of them since. My friends have always been pushy when it comes to socializing, and that night was no exception. I moved back to my hometown a few months later because I needed to be with my family. I transferred to the local university in an attempt to regain my sense of normalcy. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too bitter, or if perhaps they didn't think it would go that far, that Ashton would be that kind of person. But I can't forget what's happened. I can't forget what I went through because of them. I didn't really feel like going to the party again, but I knew that if I said no one more than once, they'd think I was avoiding them on purpose. So I gave it after a few minutes of hesitation and a flurry of texts from Sammy, Diana, and Pink. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I did need a break from my usual routine, because they were always telling me that I was spending too much time alone, that I was closing myself off too much, and that I needed to start living again. I'd never admitted it aloud, but I wondered if they had a point. The party was at a famous club downtown, a place I'd avoided for years, and the mere thought of it made my skin crawl. The atmosphere hit me like a wave as we entered the club I would have much preferred to stay in, wrapped in a blanket, in the comfort of my room, the same room my mom had left me before she passed away, the one place that still felt safe, sacred. But something about that night pushed me to go. Perhaps it was loneliness wearing me down, perhaps it was a need for change, or perhaps I just gave in to the pressure, because I no longer had the strength to argue. The room was tangled with sweat, the claustrophobic crush of unfamiliar bodies moving too close. My friends immediately vanished into the crowd, laughing and dancing, if this were their natural habitat. They appeared free and unburdened, while I stood motionless, hugging myself, a silent spectator on the sidelines, feeling as though I had made a mistake. The music pounded in my chest like a second heartbeat. The lights flashed so quickly that they made me dizzy, and the air was thick with the sharp stench of alcohol and cigarette smoke. Perhaps it was the slow creep of the cocktails I'd sipped nervously, or the music pulsing through my veins, syncing with my heartbeat. But whatever it was, I felt my limbs grow lighter, my shoulders loosen, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, I let the sound carry me. Before I knew it, my feet began to move, and I let the rhythm take over. It was like opening a window in a dusty room, allowing me to breathe again. I wasn't exactly happy, but I wasn't numb, and that felt like progress. Then I saw him. He was tall, blonde, and had intense eyes that met mine even from the other side of the room. He pushed through the crowd toward me without saying a word, and he danced, brushing against me, but never touching. His movements were fluid, effortless, and magnetic. There was something confident, possibly even dangerous, about him. I mimicked his rhythm without even thinking, and we moved together as if we had practiced it. There was no space between us. The buzz of alcohol in my blood made me bolder than usual. My hands found his body, and his explored mind with an intimacy that seemed unreal. For a few moments, it was just us, the music, and the movement. I saw my friends watching from a distance, grinning, and they seemed almost smug, as if they had finally managed to get me to live a little, as they always said. It was odd to see their approval, while feeling so different from who I usually am. Finally, the guy leaned in, said something I couldn't quite hear over the music, then took my hand and walked me to a more peaceful corner. The unexpected silence, away from the speakers, felt like breathing. We ordered drinks, another round, despite the fact that I would normally have stopped by then. But that night, I didn't care. The sugary cocktails calmed my nerves, and his presence was even more intoxicating than the alcohol. We talked for a while, and when he asked me questions about my life and interests, I responded honestly and openly, as if I had nothing to hide for once. Then he leaned in again, more purposefully this time, and said, "Your place or mine?" His voice was quiet as he inquired. I heard myself say, "I live nearby," and I was surprised at how calm it sounded. He smiled, took my hand again, and we left. I don't remember the walk to my house. I don't remember the street lights, the noise, or whether I locked the door behind us. It was a bold question, one I'd never been asked so directly before. My heart leapt. I was not fully myself at that moment. When we walked into my apartment, my neighbor saw us. I saw the sharp flicker of disapproval in her eyes, but I ignored it because, for once, I wasn't going to let other people's opinions affect me. I was living in the present, something I hadn't done in what seemed like forever. Inside, everything became a blur of passion, and as soon as the door closed behind us, it seemed as though the outside world vanished. I let go of all my reservations and simply gave into the intensity of the night. My room was immaculate, eerily untouched, as if the previous night had never happened. For a moment, I thought he might still be in the bathroom, or perhaps he had stepped out to grab something, but a quick search of the apartment confirmed the sinking suspicion growing in my gut. I felt awake, fully present, and alive for the first time in months, maybe longer. It was reckless, uncharacteristic, but I didn't care. When I opened my eyes the next morning, it felt like slamming into a wall at full speed. He was gone, not just gone, but as if he had never been there at all. My heart pounded in my chest as I foolishly went through the living room, kitchen, and even closet to make sure everything was where I'd left it before leaving. Nothing had changed or been disturbed, and I felt sick. My mind was a complete mess, jumbled and panicked. What the devil had happened? Had I imagined it all? Could the alcohol have really caused it? I needed someone to confirm that what I remembered was true. So I hurried out and knocked on my neighbor's door, the same woman who had seen me the previous evening, who opened it slowly, her eyebrows rising in bewilderment at the urgency in my face. "Did you see the guy leave my place last night?" I asked, my head throbbing as I poured myself a glass of water, the cold helping to steady my shaking hands. I inquired, panting, and she gave me a perplexed look. "Which man?" "Ruth. You didn't come home with anyone. You came back alone. You were, well, kind of stumbling, mumbling to yourself. I assumed you were just drunk." I glanced at her, shocked. "The one I came home with. Blonde, tall. We walked in together." Her lips tightened slightly. Then she shook her head. I backed away slowly, mumbling a thank you before staggering back into my apartment, my stomach churning. I fumbled for my phone and called Sammy, desperate to hear anything that would contradict what I had just been told. But she confirmed it. "Yeah, babe, you were super drunk. There wasn't a guy at all." She gave me a sad, almost pitying look and shook her head again. "No, you were alone, dancing like crazy, really into it. And then you sat in the corner by yourself, talking and laughing, as if someone were there, which honestly scared us a little. After you said something about a hot guy, I sat down hard on the sofa, my vision blurred, and I felt scared and ashamed because I had never experienced anything like this before. Had my mind truly made this up? Had my loneliness, most bizarre thing wasn't how vivid it all felt, but rather how real he seemed, the touch, the smell, the sound of his breath near my ear, because it didn't feel like something my imagination could conjure. At times, I tried to tell myself that it was all a dream, a desperate fantasy my subconscious clung to after months of emotional numbness. At other times, I wonder if he had been real, if he was really there with me that night. But the most unsettling part didn't happen until weeks later. Diana invited us over for a laid-back girls' afternoon at her house. No loud music, no crowded rooms, just he decided to go, thinking it would be harmless. But as I was sitting in her living room drinking lemonade, I noticed a framed picture on her shelf. It was a group photo, a little faded, and a tall blonde man in a green t-shirt stood holding a surfboard, smiling broadly, looking vaguely familiar from a distance. I leaned forward, squinting, something drawing me toward it, and when I was close, enough to see his face clearly, I felt the color drain from mine. It was him, the club guy, the guy I danced with, the guy who disappeared. I was motionless when Diana's voice pierced the quiet behind me. He was good looking, right? I turned slowly. Who is he? She gave me a small smile, her face tinged with sadness. Peter, my brother, passed away in a car accident last year. The room felt like it was tilting under me. My knees felt like they were about to buckle. I was having trouble breathing. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, she said, squinting as she took in my face. I nodded too hastily, however. I wasn't even near. I couldn't tell her. What could I say? That to have no idea what actually happened that night, whether it was a mental breakdown, a supernatural encounter, or some cruel trick of fate. But I know that the memory hasn't diminished in the slightest. I can still feel the way he held my hand, still hear the way his breath hitched when I touched him, and that scares me more than anything else. Perhaps she slept with her dead brother's ghost. Maybe I had hallucinated or experienced something no one could explain. I made up a weak excuse about leaving the kitchen tap running and left as quickly as possible. Either way, I've made two promises to myself. I'll never again allow my friends to influence me into doing something I don't feel comfortable with, and I will never touch another drop of alcohol in my lifetime. Every year, my friend Carl and I made it a point to get away from the bustle of the city and retreat to his grandparents' cabin in the Georgia mountains. Each trip was an opportunity to take in the fresh mountain air, detach from the outside world, and enjoy the quiet of the forest. We would hike, fish, and tell stories by the fire to men seeking that elusive balance between excitement and tranquility. But one trip in particular still gives me the chills. On a cool autumn night, Carl proposed that we go for a nighttime walk along a nearby trail. Now, I wasn't exactly excited about the idea. The path wasn't exactly beginner-friendly. It was a gravel trail that was mostly used by hunters, the odd off-grid camper, and occasionally reckless motorcyclists seeking a thrill. It was uneven, isolated, and, to be honest, kind of creepy in the dark. I told him that it didn't seem like the safest course of action, especially since we weren't familiar with the trail at night. In his eyes. Come on, man, he said. We'll just walk a bit, enjoy the stars. It'll be fine. After dinner, I gave in, thinking a little adventure wouldn't hurt. We grabbed flashlights and left, Carl bouncing with energy and me a little more reserved. However, as soon as we arrived at the trailhead, something felt strange. An old black Chevy SUV parked close to the entrance looked worn out, as if it had been through years of rough driving and poor maintenance. There were two middle-aged men standing next to it, and they didn't look like hikers. One was leaning against the hood with a cigarette hanging from his lips, and the other was standing stiffly with his arms crossed, looking around the trees as if he was expecting something or someone. I froze because it wasn't often that people were out here this late, and that SUV didn't belong. It wasn't just the car. It was their pasture. The nervous looks, the way they weren't acknowledging us yet. I muttered, This doesn't feel right. Leaning nearer Carl, aware that we were there. Yeah, let's take the other trail. The one by the creek, half a mile down, he said, nodding and narrowing his gaze. Things began to feel normal again there. The air was clear and clean, and the sounds of the night, the rustling leaves, and the distant owl calls surrounded us like a well-known tune. We drove a little further and backed off carelessly before parking close to a less traveled trail that led deeper into the woods. About 20 minutes in, a dog began to bark. At first, it was a faint echo riding the breeze, but it grew louder, sharper, closer. It came from somewhere off the path, perhaps 300 feet ahead, buried in the trees. We walked in silence, flashlights blazing narrow paths through the darkness, stars flickering like ancient watchmen above. Carl paused. "You hear that?" "Yeah," I replied, glancing into the darkness. "You believe there is a dog out here?" Ho, bringing a dog out at this hour of the day. We didn't know if it was tethered or roaming free, so if it was wild, we were in trouble. I turned to Carl and said, "Man, maybe we should call it. We'll come back in the morning." That barking wasn't friendly. It was agitated and frantic, as if the dog had seen something it didn't like. My stomach tightened. The barking subsided behind us, but the uneasiness persisted. After a few seconds, he sighed quietly and said, "Yeah, all right, let's head back." We turned around and started to backtrack, but something stopped us in our tracks when we were within 1,000 feet of Carl's Jeep. A second car was parked directly behind our car, its headlights shining like searchlights through the trees, and we stood motionless, a chill wave crashing over us both. Just after 10 o'clock at night, we were on a secluded trail in the middle of nowhere, with an unidentified car inches behind us. We knew that something wasn't right, and we ducked behind a big pine tree off the trail, breathing shallowly and quietly, afraid to speak, my heart hammering in my ears. Carl carefully unzipped his backpack and took out a pair of night vision binoculars he had brought along more as a novelty than anything else, held them to his eyes, and looked around. The car was sitting there like a predator waiting in the dark, and we couldn't see much because of the shadows and the headlight glare. I whispered, "Can you see anything?" And he slowly shook his head. "Nothing, but I don't like it." The sense of being watched crept up our spines, the kind of dread that gets into your bones and won't go away. So we remained crouching behind that tree, hoping the car would depart. We were frozen, afraid to even breathe too loudly, and the thought of going back to the Jeep seemed reckless. What if those guys were dangerous? What if they were looking for us? Time crawled. After what seemed like hours, the car finally started to move. It moved slowly, its headlights shining, every creak of a branch and every gust of wind brushing through the leaves felt like they might reveal something terrifying. We ducked behind a fallen log that lay across a small rise off the trail, crouching low, every muscle tense, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. Then, suddenly, that same black Chevy SUV from earlier rolled into view, just a few meters from where we were hiding. It passed slowly, windows down, the engine barely humming. Carl nodded silently, his face pale in the dark. My stomach dropped as it circled Carl's Jeep. If it were hunting something or someone, Carl was holding the log like it was the only thing holding him to the ground, and I mouthed to him, "They're the same guys," as the SUV circled again, slower this time, getting closer to our hiding place. I stopped breathing completely when I saw his face that close, his cold, sharp features, and his dark, empty eyes. These weren't just guys out for a fun ride. Everything about them screamed trouble, danger, and possibly violence. I closed my eyes, hoping and praying that they would leave, and by some miracle, they did. After a long, agonizing minute, the car continued down the trail and vanished into the darkness. We waited another moment, making sure they were gone, before crawling out. From behind the log, it felt like every second was a countdown to something terrible. If they had stepped out of the car, if they had even looked in our direction, they would have seen us dot for the first few minutes. Neither of us spoke because we were too overwhelmed to process what had just happened. Our legs were unsteady, and the adrenaline was still pumping through our bodies. "We need to get the hell out of here," Carl muttered, voice hoarse. We ran, crashed through the brush, and we didn't care about the noise anymore. Every rustle of leaves and every snapping twig behind us made us whip our heads around, half expecting that SUV to come barreling out of the trees. Carl and I couldn't stop talking about it for days. That car, those men, and the sickening feeling that they were looking for someone, and it might have been us. Who were they? Why were they out there so late? And more importantly, what would have happened if they had found us? A few days later, Carl made the decision to go back to the area during the day with his grandfather, saying he wanted to show him where it all happened and maybe take a few pictures to show him that we weren't dreaming. He asked me to accompany him, but I declined without hesitation. I told him, "There's no way I'm going back there." Not yet. I was shocked to learn that they returned much earlier than I had anticipated, and I could tell something was off when they drew up to the cabin. Carl's grandfather, who is normally composed and unflappable, appeared shaken, and Carl himself did as well. What happened? They were there, Carl stated calmly after taking a deep breath. The same black truck, same location. I felt my gut tighten. The driver turned on the engine and started to pursue us as soon as they saw us. However, Grandpa was aware of a shortcut. Very few people use some old service trails. Without hesitation, he seized it and lost them. I was taken aback. That night, I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about those men pursuing us back to the cabin. I sat up in bed at every sound outside. I had no doubt that they would come looking. "I'm going back to the city. You should come, too. At least for a few days," I informed Carl and his grandfather the following morning, but they remained unyielding as ever. Fortunately, nothing occurred. Days went by without any problems. After a few weeks, everything appeared to return to normal. Carl called me a few months later with an update that made me feel incredibly cold, but it also gave me a strange feeling of closure. A state commission was established. He claimed that several men connected to a drug trafficking organization were apprehended right there in those woods. They were at work. It had not been paranoia then. In actuality, we had discovered something illicit and hazardous. Then things changed. The neighborhood grew safer. No more shadows in the dark. No more odd cars. And after a year, I was at last prepared to go back with Carl and his grandfather. We returned to the cabin as before. But that night will always be etched in my memory, regardless of how many years go by. The silence, the anxiety, and the knowledge that we had been only seconds away from something unimaginable. I still get chills from it. I will always remember those high school years. I was one of those ladies who always seemed to be at the top of the social scale and had a close-knit group of friends who travel everywhere together. That circle for me consisted of Genesis and Lucia. We couldn't be separated. We referred to ourselves as the trio. Perhaps a bit arrogant, but it seemed real at the time. We made the decision one afternoon to begin hosting sleepovers at Genesis, place once a month. By the end of the month, we had the entire home to ourselves because her parents were frequently gone on business. There was a large living room, a well-stocked kitchen, and a wine cabinet that her mother never really noticed. To be honest, if we had used up half of her bottles, she probably wouldn't have noticed because she had so many. The activities that took place on those evenings were typical of teenagers, pretending to be adult women in a society that still treated us like children, chatting about the guys at school, cheap wine, and corny romance films. It felt harmlessly reckless and enjoyable. However, everything changed one night. Lucia was unable to attend. She had previously missed a few days of school due to an illness that I believe was either a cold or the flu. Only Genesis and I remained. assuming that the evening would be dull without the three of us. I recall texting her to offer to cancel. "Are you still coming?" I inquired. She shrugged, indicating that she didn't care in any case, and answered, "Sure, I'll bring a book just in case." I made the decision to go. We met Daniela on the way out of school that day. She was the type of girl who seemed to float through the corridors, always engrossed in a book, quiet, strange. She only had herself and no true friends. In the past, she made an effort to speak with us, but we consistently ignored her. She saw us close to the school gate. "Hey girls," she remarked cheerfully, with a hesitant sense of optimism in her voice. We didn't answer straight away. That biology lecture with Mrs. Spencer was cruel. "Hey, Daniela," I said, forcing a friendly tone. "Do you have any plans tonight?" Her face lit up, eyes wide and blinking as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Genesis and I looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only close friends can have. And then it occurred to us, invite Daniela to the sleepover. Not out of kindness, not really. We thought it might be funny to mess with her. I'm ashamed of that now, but at the time it felt like a game. She stammered, clutching her books tighter. "No, I know. We're having a sleepover at Genesis's place. You should come," I said. "Starting at 6 o'clock. She literally jumped with excitement. Yes, oh my God. Really, her enthusiasm was so overwhelming that for a brief moment, I felt a knot in my stomach, possibly guilt. There was a quiet tension in the house, and Genesis and I laughed when Daniela skipped off, her joy echoing down the hallway. We thought the night would be fun in a twisted way, but we were so wrong. Later that evening, I sat on the living room couch, swirling red wine in a glass that felt too adult in my hand, while Genesis was in the bathroom perfecting her eyeliner. Genesis' smirk seemed a little less certain, but we shrugged it off. Then the doorbell rang. "Showtime," I whispered with a smile. "Come on," I called, pulling Genesis by the wrist. When we opened the door, Daniela was there, her cheeks flushed, wearing her typical oversized sweater, and she had made a clumsy attempt at makeup. Genesis gave her a glass of wine, which she drank so quickly that I could almost hear her swallowing, and her hands shaking. Daniela laughed along, glowing under the attention. But as the minutes went by, something in Genesis changed. The game wasn't enough anymore, so she leaned forward, her eyes glinting, and said slowly, swirling her own. Genesis gave her another, this time with a little less filling. After we were settled in the living room, Genesis suggested we play truth or dare. It was the classic move. Glass of wine. "Is it true what people say about your dad cheating on your mom?" I froze. I knew that was a sensitive topic. Everyone at school had heard rumors about it, but no one ever dared to bring it up around Daniela. Her smile instantly faltered. Can we not talk about that?" she said softly, her eyes lowering. To her lap, Genesis didn't let up. "Come on, it's truth or dare. You're not allowed to skip the truth." Daniela looked at me, begging, but I remained silent. Daniela's eyes glowed with anticipation as Genesis said, "I dare you to go to Mrs. Spencer's house and scare her. Climb through her window. Give her a good jolt." I should have. I really should have. "I know you want to be part of our group," Genesis said, her voice light but sharp. "But if you really mean it, you have to do something first." I didn't say anything, but what Genesis was implying seemed strange. Mrs. Spencer had always been rigorous, even nasty at times. Daniela halted, her wine glass halfway to her lips. "Wait, really? Her home? Come on," I urged, attempting to maintain a light-hearted tone. "It will be enjoyable. After everything she's done to us, she truly deserves it." There was a single instance when Daniela appeared uncertain. Her fingers trembled a little, and she looked at the floor. But then I noticed that she nodded slowly. Perhaps it was the wine's effect, or perhaps she simply wanted to fit in. Regardless, we gave her a plastic Halloween mask that Genesis had lying around. and the three of us slipped out into the night like naughty kids with a secret plan. With our hearts racing, we crept around the side of Mrs. Spencer's house. Genesis and I huddled in the shadows by a bush, barely able to control our laughter. "She's going to freak out," Genesis whispered gleefully. The darkness was broken by a scream that made my blood run. We initially laughed because we believed the prank had been a complete success. Genesis added, "I hope Mrs. Spencer finally learns to stop being such a witch," in between chuckles. The laughing, however, was short-lived. Shouting, loud, frightened shouting, followed by smashing, crashing, glass breaking, and other unmistakable sounds of commotion, drowned it out. Both of us froze, our smiles suddenly fading. I said, "What the hell is going on?" The first gunshot rang out, followed by another, before we could even start to move. There was an eerie, terrifying silence in the area. My heart fell. For the first time that evening, Genesis appeared truly frightened when I turned to face her. Her lips were parted, but she was unable to speak, and her face was pale. We both ran away without saying a word. We ran as if we were running for our lives. Perhaps they did. We continued till we got to our house. Breathless and shaking, we slammed the door behind us and fell to the ground. Genesis eventually said, "Oh my God, what did we do?" In a voice so quiet I could hardly hear it. I was unable to talk. I simply repeatedly aggressively shook my head, perhaps in an attempt to dispel reality. The doorbell then ding-dong. Both of us jumped as if we had been startled. Stepping carefully to the door, Genesis peered through the blinds. "Daniela is here." Slowly, she opened the door. Daniela stood there with tears in her eyes, dripping down her face, her hands trembling wildly. Blood was all over her, spilled blood on the entrance mat. The floor tilted beneath me. What took place? I stumbled. Daniela could hardly talk as, "You mentioned, I entered through the window." She had fallen asleep. She leapt out of bed when I approached her as I slipped up the stairs. Her shoulders trembled as she sobbed. She didn't yell. She assaulted me. We had trouble. She refused to stop when I tried to explain that it was a joke. She grabbed a gun and ran inside her closet. I was unable to move because of my fear. She fired, but it missed. I went into a panic. To remove the gun, I tackled her. Once more, it went off. Daniela's tone faltered. She felt it in her tummy. She fell to the ground. I made an effort to halt the bleeding, I promise. When I touched the wound, there was too much blood. She passed away. She's no longer alive. She's dead. My God, the terror crept like cold into our bones as we stood there in silence. Nobody made a move. Nobody breathed. Nobody breathed. We made a deal that night, but it was based on desperation rather than trust. We agreed to keep things under wraps. Mrs. Spencer's body was discovered in her bedroom the following morning. The announcement sent the entire school into a frenzy. Immediately, rumors began to circulate. It was a break-in gone wrong, according to some. Others pointed the finger at a local serial burglar who had lately broken into a few houses. No suspect was ever located by the police. They didn't even give us a glance, but our secret remained like a knife stuck between us. Daniela began to deteriorate in the days that followed. She stopped turning in assignments and skipped classes. I once caught her murmuring to herself while standing motionless in the hallway. "Hey," I put a kind touch on her shoulder and murmured. She continued to stare at a blank area of the wall without responding or blinking, her lips moving in an incomprehensible whisper. I mentioned it to Genesis later. We both agreed that she must have been more affected by the guilt than we had thought. Actually, I was also guilty. Still do. A stupid act caused someone to die. Nasty joke. Daniela, another individual, was irreparably damaged. Daniela's family silently moved out a few months later. No farewells or forwarding addresses. She disappeared. She never got back to us. I still think about her a lot, though, pertaining to that evening. I will never be able to shake the recollection of that night. Perhaps the truth will be out eventually. Perhaps one of us will have the guts to come clean, but I secretly doubt it. I immediately invited my buddy to stay at my flat for a time when she broke up with her boyfriend. It seemed like the proper course of action. Since high school, she had been my best friend and confidant. However, I might have hesitated if someone had told me that this one act of compassion would ruin my life. There were few incidents throughout. The first few weeks, Leth's eyes were glassy as she spent much of the day lounging on the couch, chain smoking, and binge-watching true crime shows. I was working double shifts at the restaurant in the meanwhile simply to keep the fridge filled and the bills paid. She promised to start looking for a job, quickly, but at best her efforts were mediocre. I figured everyone deserves a cushion to land on, so I made excuses for her, even to myself, when she said, "I just need a little time to clear my head," one night, while her eyes were fixed on the screen. I nodded, trying to be understanding, but then little things started to feel off. First, it was my cigarettes. I'd come home and half the pack would be gone, even though I hadn't touched them. Next, it was the food. I opened the refrigerator at night, exhausted and hungry from a long shift, expecting to see the leftovers I had carefully saved for the week gone, but instead I found her sprawled on the couch in my pajamas, drinking the last of the 6-pack of beer I'd stashed behind the juice. Really? That's the third time this week," I remarked, my voice tense with annoyance. "At the very least, could you leave me something?" She smirked and shrugged at me, saying, "Come on, it's just beer. I'll replace it, promise." She never did, of course, but I might have dismissed it and put it down to stress until I realized my emergency fund, a couple $100 I kept stashed away in a shoebox under the bed for unexpected hospital bills or rent shortages, was gone. I confronted her that evening, expecting an admission of guilt or even an apology, but she exploded. "Why would I steal from you? I'm your best friend," she exclaimed, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. "How in the world did you think I would do that?" Her emotional outburst was so raw, so perfectly timed that for a moment I actually doubted myself. Had I misplaced the money? Was I losing it? The truth slapped me the very next day. Eric, my boyfriend, called around noon. "Let's hear," he whispered in a quiet voice. It seemed like the air had been taken out of my lungs as she said, "She showed up drunk. She says you kicked her out. She has cash on her, and she says it's yours." "Eric," I said cautiously and slowly. He finally said, "I couldn't just leave her out there. She said she had nowhere to go." When I got home that night, the apartment was quiet, eerily so. Leigh was gone. There were no clothes, no mess, not even the faint smell of cigarettes. Just a single note on the kitchen table scrolled in her mind. "Please tell me you didn't let her in." There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch through the phone like a weight. The words struck me like a slap, sharp, unexpected, and cruel. I stared at the note Lethe left behind, and part of me was relieved that she was finally gone, that at least I had my apartment back. Also, I thought, hurried handwriting. "I'm sorry, Arya, but I had to. I miss my family. I'm going back to them. They're all better than you." A month went by with no calls or texts, and then one sunny afternoon, while I was sitting on the balcony drinking tea, my phone rang. It was her. "Hey, Arya." Her voice was full of excitement. "I'm pregnant." I froze. I felt as though time had stopped and everything had subsided. "Oh," I finally forced a smile even though she couldn't see it. "I imagine Greg will be thrilled," she laughed. Light and airy, but with a hint of something smug. "Nope, it's not Greg's." Afterward, her voice fell into a gleeful whisper. "You'll never guess who the father is." My stomach sank. I knew who the father is even before she said the name. "Lethia, please tell me it's not Eric." "Oh, but it is," she said, almost triumphantly. "He's as excited as I am. Don't you think he's cute?" I was unable to speak, my breath caught in my throat. My heart thumped in my ears. "Why can't you just be happy for me?" she added bitterly. "Why do you have to be so jealous all the time? 4 days. I was unable to function. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. And all I did was replay every conversation, every moment, trying to figure out how I had missed the signs. I hung up without saying a word. My hand trembled. The world tilted around me, and I had to sit down before I collapsed. It was too much, too sudden. The betrayal cut deep, slicing through everything I had believed about love, trust, and friendship. After 2 weeks of innumerable denials, evasions, and gaslighting, Eric eventually came clean. "I was drunk," he sobbed, "and she was there and it just happened. But it was a mistake. I felt like I was falling apart from the inside out." I looked closely at him and saw the pitiful coward. He had become the man who had destroyed everything for a moment of weakness. "Please, Arya, forgive me." His voice broke, his face begging for forgiveness. The fact that he betrayed me so easily made me sick. I had loved him and trusted her, and they both turned around and threw it away as if it meant nothing. What hurt more than losing him was losing her, the girl I once loved like a sister. "No," I said firmly, getting up and backing away. "You damaged everything, and now you live with the consequences." But as time went on, an odd thing happened. They remained together for a few months, and then I heard that they split up a few weeks before their son was born. It turns out that Eric cheated on her too, with someone even younger, and he left without looking back. Now, Leth is seeing a new man who is shallow and self-centered, and to be honest, that's what she deserves. As for me, it took some time, but I eventually recovered, and I learned how to surround myself with betrayal can break everything, but sometimes that's exactly what you need, because in the brokenness, you find a new version of yourself, stronger, wiser, and unwilling to settle for less than real. Hello everyone, I want to tell you about my husband, Gail. He was a damn good businessman, always chasing some deal or flying somewhere across the country. People who truly add value to my life. People who love without manipulation. People who care without keeping score. When he came home last summer and casually announced that he would be going to Missouri for a week to meet some distributors, I would normally have taken it in stride. But this time it hurt. It was our anniversary week, and I asked him calmly but firmly if he could cancel the trip. I loved him deeply, I really did, but something changed over the years, and he began to feel like a stranger, like someone I used to know. When I confronted him, he retreated, saying, "Nicole should have reminded me," as if it were her responsibility to remember his marriage. I stared at him in disbelief, wondering if he was really blaming someone else for forgetting our anniversary. He didn't even hesitate before saying no, and then it hit me, he'd forgotten. His voice was sharp, almost cruel, as if punishing Nicole would take away the pain in my chest. But that only made it worse. This wasn't about her, it was about us, and I decided I wasn't going to let it ruin me. If he wouldn't do something special for me, I would do it for myself. He tried to fix it by pulling out his phone, dialing the office, and firing Nicole right in front of me. He simply nodded when I informed him. "That's probably for the best," he replied, as if he was eager to get the guilt out of his head. I put on a smile and pretended to agree, but my heart felt like lead. He departed early on Monday. I wasn't even awakened. There was only a scrawled message on his bedside. I was by myself in our house that day, wrapped up in a quiet grief. I couldn't continue like this, but I also didn't want to evict him. His career always comes first. Fatty called some friends in the afternoon, and we laughed too much while trying to forget while spending the day by the pool. Our official anniversary was on Tuesday. I cancelled the spa visit. I had no desire to be spoiled. All I wanted was quiet. I unearthed some old outfits I hadn't seen in years, cooked, and organized my closet. I watched television. I had too much to drink. By the time evening arrived, I was inebriated, worn out, and still unsure of my marital goals, unaware of the time. I fell asleep on the couch. Then there were footsteps. I snapped out of it. My heart leapt. Maybe, I thought, Gail had surprised me by returning. Anticipating him, I turned. He wasn't the one. Nicole was the one. Her face was locked in an inappropriate smile as she stood there in the TV's dim illumination. Lifeless, strained, and cold, I looked down at her hands. She had a kitchen knife in her hand. With a quivering voice, I questioned, "What are you doing here? Gail, where are you?" "He's not here," she yelled, her voice abruptly sharp. If it had been brewing. Anxiety swept over me. She moved closer, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Missouri was not visited. She gave a hiss. "He's either with Monica or Samantha. Choose." I gazed at her. My entire universe tilted to one side. "What? No, you're blind," he said. She spit. "Everything he says you believe. 4 years. He has been unfaithful to you. You played the ideal wife 4 years." I was ill. The room whirled. "I have no idea who Monica or Samantha are. You're not correct." Nicole chuckled bitterly, the kind with more hurt than comedy. "You don't, of course. You believe that you are unique. He treated me the same way he treated you. Took advantage of me, tossed me aside." The words hurt. I sensed a piece of me breaking somewhere deep inside. It wasn't the worst part, though. The fact that she was getting so close frightened me. She was here to do more than chat, and she still had the knife in her hand. An adrenaline rush occurred. I looked around the room for an exit or anything I might use. However, she lunged and gave me a forceful shove before I could respond. My elbow struck the coffee table. As I slid to the ground, my arm began to hurt. She was instantly on me, straddling my waist and holding me down as I struggled to get to my feet. She put her forearm against my throat. She was powerful, abnormally strong, and I tried to grab at her arm while I gagged and gasped. She felt a strength that seemed unattainable when she was angry. The knife was inches from my face and hovered above us. My vision became hazy. Panic seized over. I was unable to breathe, but my chest heaved. I would die. I was going to die because of this lady. This damaged Nicole, I croaked, my words hardly audible. Wait, don't, Nicole, please. I'd rather not fight you." A heartbeat passed while she paused. Her hand relaxed a bit. I took advantage of the opportunity. I coughed and repeated, "I'm on your side," hoping to help her regain her sanity. She faltered, but the knife didn't cut through her expression. "Look at me. I'm his wife. And he cheated on me, too. We're both victims. You think this is justice, but this isn't fair to you either." She blinked, staring into my eyes, but her body stopped trembling. I continued talking, unsure if I was saving myself or just postponing the inevitable. Nicole continued to hold her hand lightly against my throat, but the pressure dropped, and her expression wavered for a brief moment. But it was enough, so I took advantage of that hesitation. "Let's talk about this, okay?" I whispered, trying to catch her eyes. "Just let's talk." Nicole stood there frozen, and then, after a long pause, she stepped. Her movements were uncertain and shaky. She still didn't trust me completely, but I could tell something inside her had broken open. She stumbled to the couch, a little wobbling in her gait, and sagged onto the cushions before slapping the seat next to her and waving me in. My nerves, still raw and alert. She took the wine bottle from the table and drank deeply as I sat, her hands shaking a little. "Don't try anything," she said flatly. My skin crawled when she said, "If you do, I swear to God, I'll kill you." Her eyes were glassy, full of anger and something broken, and she wasn't bluffing. I sat rigidly, every muscle tight, my mind racing, when I noticed my cell phone on the cushion next to me. I didn't even remember leaving it there, but there it was. Perhaps it was salvation. I struggled to remain composed, reaching slowly to pick it up while feigning to shift my weight. Nicole handed me the wine bottle once more, and I took it with trembling hands. I pretended to cough dramatically after taking a sip in the hopes of diverting her attention long enough, but she erupted in loud, sudden, unhinged laughter, so I took advantage of the sound. Using my free hand, I slid the phone into my lap, turned the volume down to silent, and dialed 911. The call connected, and I could hear the faint click. No words. I knew the dispatcher could hear everything, so I tried to be in character and chuckled too, even though it sounded fake. Then, warily, I said, "So, what do we do about Gale?" "Kill him," Nicole said, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world, as she looked at me with something dark flickering in her eyes. Her voice trailed off as she described how she had broken into our house, and how her initial plan was to kill me, and then wait for Gale to arrive, so she could attack him as well. Her words came out in a bitter stream, slurred by wine and rage. "Tell me everything," I said, urging her to come closer as I leaned in and nodded. She revealed everything when she asked, what happened between you and him, how he had wooed her, made extravagant promises, and treated her like a plaything, how she had learned about Monica, Samantha, and other women, how he threw her away like garbage, if she had protected his secrets and buried his shady business dealings. She growled, "I did everything for him, everything," and Hesh was so inebriated that she didn't even notice my careful probing. But then her tone changed, and she leaned in close, her breath hot with wine. "Are you going to help me kill him?" I kept nodding, feeding her rage, trying to get her to say more, hoping every word would be clear to the 911 operator. "I'm not going to kill anyone," she answered plainly, and I hesitated as my heart pounded against my ribs. One wrong word could end it all. I murmured. She nodded, her lips quivering into a smile. "When he gets home, you meet him on the second floor, get him talking, keep him distracted. Then I'll come up behind him and push him down the stairs, fast, clean, no blood. Looks like an accident, but tell me what you need from me and I'll do it." It was a lie, but I had to keep her talking. We heard it, the distinct thud of the front door bursting open, followed by the heavy footsteps of officers rushing inside. Nicole's head whipped toward the sound, her eyes widened in rage, and she turned to me with pure hatred. "You called them," she shrieked, as she described it. It was so calm and well practiced that it chilled me to the bone. Perhaps she had practiced this before. Goosebumps appeared along my arms. "Police, here," I screamed, and two officers rushed into the room. Nicole snarled and spun around, but they were on her in seconds. She fought, kicking and swearing, but they pinned her down and wrestled the knife out of her hands. She thrashed violently as they dragged her out in handcuffs, screaming every venomous thing she could think of. Everything slowed. I saw the knife flash in her hand as she sprang at me, shrieking like a wild animal. "Fall. You're a coward. You could have gotten rid of him. You weren't strong enough." "I don't care," I murmured calmly as I watched her go out the door, breathless and frozen. "He'll ruin you like he did me. He will receive what is due." After gently guiding me to a corner, an officer started to take my statement. "Did you record the 911 call?" I asked him, almost whispering, and he nodded. He gave me a weird look when I asked if I could get a copy, but he finally said yes. I received the audio file the following day. I meticulously edited it, removing all but Nicole's admissions concerning Gale, as well as the deception, infidelity, and dubious financial dealings. I then forwarded it to his business associates. I made it public on his Facebook page. For the first time in years, it felt like breathing. I went upstairs that afternoon and packed his belongings into a suitcase. At last, smug and unaware, Gale entered the front door. Without saying anything, I gave him the luggage. I stated, "We're getting a divorce," with composure. He looked shocked, as if he couldn't believe I had finally confronted him. "You're not staying here." However, I did, and it was really satisfying. I knew I would get half his money and the property, even though the papers weren't signed yet. Nicole had desired bloodshed as retribution, but I would properly destroy him, and it succeeded. The scandal broke out right away. His company sacked him after his shady dealings and double life were made public. He lost his mistresses. His companions turned away. He departed town after packing up. I didn't see him again after that, and I've never once questioned his whereabouts. I can still clearly recall the day. Mom looked like a teenager again, with a sparkle in her eyes, as she led a man into our living room. She was almost glowing. She said, "This is John," with a hint of excitement. We got to know each other at work. I hadn't heard her voice in a long time, yet it sounded pleasant and light. I hope. John appeared to be quite normal, dark, tall, and a touch disheveled. Beard is just unkempt enough to look deliberate. However, there was an oddity in his smile. It was a bit too haughty and a bit too wide. He extended his hand and remarked, "Nice to meet you, Tara," with a confidence that bordered on conceit. Out of courtesy, I shook it, but his hold was just a bit too tight. My skin crawled. I told myself to be fair, though. The loss of Dad had left Mom feeling lonely. Maybe I could adjust to this guy if he brought back her grin. Dad could never be replaced, however. I wanted Mom to be content. Following that evening, John began to show up more frequently. He appeared keen to impress everyone, particularly my cousin Liam and I, who had been staying with us since the previous year. He initially pretended to be the endearing new acquaintance. Arriving with, he was surprised with a new gaming headset, movie tickets, and a basketball signed by a minor league star for Liam. On paper, everything seemed kind, even considerate, but there was a sense of calculation, as if he was checking boxes. Then the big bombshell arrived. John and Mom called us into the living room one evening. He smiled like he had won the lotto, as they sat side by side on the couch, a hand firmly around his. "We're getting married," he declared forthright, as if he had just learned that we were heading to Disneyland. Liam clapped and cheered. Mom's eyes sparkled as she smiled. I gritted my teeth to make a smile. I told myself I had to see if she was happy. But I was always uneasy. He was simply standing there when I turned around one evening. I was in the kitchen getting a snack. There had been no sound. He was merely observing. There were no footsteps or throat clearings. My throat tightened with my heart. Softly, "You should be more careful," he remarked. Even though his tone was low, there was something about it that made me shiver. Additionally, the way he gazed at me was more than just awkward. It was a predator. I tried to dismiss it with a nervous laugh, but he didn't blink or smile instead. He just stared for an excessive amount of time before leaving in quiet. I realized then that something was amiss. A few days later, John was watching TV when I unintentionally spilled juice on the carpet. His eyes narrowed as he slowly rose up. "Do you have any idea how much this carpet costs?" he yelled. An angry flush came over his face. The sourest breath smell hit me like a wave. "I am sorry," I said haltingly. But it wasn't enough. His hands shook me violently as they clamped down on my shoulders. He shouted in my face, his voice booming, his eyes crazy. The rush of blood in my ears made it difficult for me to hear him. Desperate to put a stop to it, I nodded rapidly. He let go, and I ran upstairs, locked my door, and spent the rest of the day indoors. I heard the shouting that night. I slipped into the corridor and popped out with a racing heart. Mom's voice was shaking and she was crying. She begged, "Please, John, calm down." However, he ignored it. Like a hurricane, his voice screamed through the walls. I paused when I caught a glimpse of him in the faint light. His fists clenched behind her. Mom had bruises all over her arms. "Stop it," I cried out. She turned, embarrassment and dread in her eyes. "Tara," she continued, "go to your room. Please, this is between us." I was surprised as I stood there, but that night, something inside of me clicked. This was not what I had imagined. I had to learn more about John. Since he was dangerous, the truth has to be known to me. What John was hiding, where he came from, and who he truly was. I had a nagging suspicion that he wasn't the man he posed as, a keen intuition that made me uneasy. I therefore sneaked into their bedroom one afternoon while he and my mother were both at work. As I opened drawers and looked through closets, my hands were shaking and my heart was thumping like a drum inside my chest. I finally located it after over an hour of searching. At the back of the closet, beneath a stack of winter clothing, is a small, dusty box. Slowly, I took it out and opened it. At least 5 phony IDs with distinct names and faces that were obviously John were found inside. They were accompanied by hefty bundles of rubber-banded cash and a number of credit cards issued under the same fictitious names. My gut wrenched as I gazed at the contents, frozen. This was dangerous in addition to being strange. My hands began to shake violently. This meant exactly what I knew. John was not the person he claimed to be. Not even close. He had deceived my mother and all of us. And suddenly, we were sharing a home with a stranger who had a criminal history. I didn't want to tell her by myself, but I knew I had to. I also needed Liam there. A person who could support me. I decided to inform her after school the following day. When the last bell rang that afternoon, I hurried to the bike rack. When I heard it, I had just unlocked my bike. That voice, "Are you enjoying your day, my love?" I went cold, my throat tightened. Each breath, he stood behind me and said, "John," with a fake smile. It was cold and tight. Goosebumps appeared all over my body. "Tara," he replied in a harsh, low voice, "we need to talk." I stumbled, automatically pulling away. "I don't want to talk to you," I said. I saw it when he took a step closer. He reached into his jacket and produced a knife. The late afternoon sun shone on the metal. "You should have minded your own damn business," he growled. Time stopped. There was an uncanny lack of activity in the school parking lot, which is typically crowded with bikes and conversation. I cried out, "Help!" While my heart pounded in my chest. "Someone help," I said, but my voice sounded as if it didn't belong on the concrete. Nobody responded. He lunged at me as I turned to run. He twisted my arm behind my back with a vicious grip. I kicked and clawed in a desperate attempt to get away. Like I was nothing, he pulled me over to his car, shoved me over the hood, and then sunk the knife into my shoulder, causing white-hot pain. I let out a yell. It felt like my whole body had caught fire, and the pain was excruciating and unreal. I realized then that I wouldn't live if I didn't fight. I'd just be another story. In the headlines, another missing youngster. Pure, blazing adrenaline surged in. After twisting, I was able to kick him firmly between the legs. He moaned, stumbling slightly. The knife skittered across the sidewalk as I rammed my fist into his hand. "Let me go," I cried out. He grabbed my ankle and pulled me down as I attempted to flee. I was stunned as I struck the ground, but then I noticed it. The knife was only a few inches away. With my heart pounding, I stretched and grabbed it as he started pulling me back. I turned and stabbed him in the neck without thinking, motivated only by fear. Immediately, blood spurted, soaking his clothing. His mouth was open, but quiet as his eyes widened in surprise. Crimson spilled between his fingers as he released his grip and staggered back, hands gripping his throat. Breathless, I watched him wobble and finally fall on the sidewalk. The knife slipped out of my grasp. While I stood motionless, blood was streaming down to my fingertips from the ache of my injured arm. Someone shouted my name, and a voice yelled out. An instructor was sprinting in my direction, with others following. However, I was immobile. I was unable to think. I was only able to gaze at John's lifeless body, resting on the concrete. Then everything started to fade. and the sirens arrived, flashing blue and red lights against the world I found myself in. A hospital bed. As I opened my eyes, my throat was dry and my shoulder was wrapped. My grandmother entered a few minutes later. She kissed my forehead and put her arms around me. I was momentarily grounded by her warmth, but she halted when I inquired, "Where's Mom?" "She's well," she murmured quietly, but I could see the truth in her eyes. Mom wasn't there. She wasn't coming, and I understood why. I moved home with my grandmother after that day, and it took me months to see her again before everything changed. It hurt, and it still hurts, but I've learned to live with it. It's been more than 7 years since I last saw her, and perhaps that's for the best. My name is Adrian. I'm from Ohio, and I've been meaning to share something that happened to me for a long time. We hardly spoke, and there was a wall between us that was too thick to get over. During the early stages of a relationship that would eventually lead to an engagement between late 2012 and early 2013, there was a particularly disturbing night that has stuck with me ever since. It was around Valentine's Day 2013, and my girlfriend and I had only been dating for a few months, not long enough to call it serious, but long enough to want to do something special together. Since Valentine's Day fell on a Monday that year, and both of us had work, we decided to celebrate on Saturday the 12th. I didn't tell her directly that this dinner was intended to be our Valentine's celebration. However, I believe we both agreed in private. I had the entire evening planned, and I wanted to surprise her with a romantic dinner, not at the Italian restaurant we'd visited a few times, but at a fancy dining establishment I'd never been inside before, one that had a tasting menu, fancy plating, candlelight, and an elegant, unforgettable atmosphere. I even went above and beyond by getting her some of her favorite snacks, small items she had mentioned in passing, like spicy almonds, a particular brand of dark chocolate, and a small bouquet of wildflowers. When Saturday finally arrived, I told her we were returning to that familiar Italian place, and she smiled and said she was looking forward to it. So we got ready. However, I drove us to the unexpected location, and as soon as we walked in, we were greeted by a soft, welcoming warmth. Staff in sharp suits took our coats, spoke in hushed, respectful tones. The lighting was low and golden, and there was a subtle scent of wine and citrus. I wanted her to see that I paid attention, that I cared, and that I created a night where everything felt just right. So, this is what people pay for, this feeling, this atmosphere, I recall thinking, and at first, everything was just fine. We ordered, laughed, told each other little stories, and marveled at how beautifully everything was plated. The wine was amazing, but then something happened that threw the entire evening off course. We were sitting next to another couple, and while they were talking and enjoying their drinks, tension started to creep into their voices. We heard bits and clips of their conversation. At first, we thought they might be kidding, but then the tone changed completely. It began with sarcastic laughter, sharp words spoken a bit too loudly, and then it escalated into outright shouting. At one point, the man slammed his hand down on the table, and the woman shot back something in a cold, trembling voice. You could feel it. All the tables around them went silent, and a waiter rushed over, whispering something urgently, trying to calm them down. I was angry, not only because they were ruining our dinner, but because everything had been going so well. But when I turned to look at my girlfriend, she was calm, smiling faintly and leaning in close. This dinner's a show all on its own, she whispered with a wink. God, I loved you. Then, without a word, the woman got up, grabbed her purse, and left, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor. The entire room was watching a play unfold. Her at that precise moment. She refused to let the negativity spoil her evening. Rather, it made her laugh. That kind of calmness and optimism in the midst of chaos. It remained in my memory. For a long moment, the man gazed at the door. His face was unreadable. Then he slowly stood up and went with her. We thought it was over for a while. Like dust, relief descended in the room. We made an effort to refocus and appreciate the evening that was left. However, the duo returned 5 minutes later, this time with the Metrody in tow. A mixture of humiliation and lingering fury caused their faces to flush. A few uneasy laughs were barely suppressed, and awkward looks were shared between tables. It was nearly ridiculous, reminiscent of a gloomy comedy. They resumed their seats, clearly attempting to pretend that nothing had occurred. All of us hoped it would stop there, that perhaps they would settle down enough to eat their food and go in peace. However, the quiet was brief. The dispute soon resumed. This time, the tones were low, caustic, and subdued, but they were laced with hardly disguised anger. Their enthusiasm was infectious. Not in a positive sense, the air was altered. It was more than simply an awkward restaurant moment. It was gloomier. I recall attempting to focus on my girlfriend's face across from me, while I was looking down at my plates with my fork in my hand. Her lips curving into that reassuring smile. Those glistening eyes. However, the argument between the couple next to us overshadowed everything. It appeared as though a storm had descended upon the eatery. The violence in their voices had diminished, yet it was still contained, like a pillow stifling a scream, and like a frost creeping beneath the surface. Everyone could sense it. Nobody said anything. Nobody was sure what to do. The mood had shifted entirely. A night of joy turned into one of subdued anxiety. It seemed to me that the altercation wasn't only destroying our evening. It was going to blow up into something far more terrible. My intuition was correct. The couple's girl got back up, but this time she didn't go to the door. Everyone was completely unprepared for what she did next. She leaned down and removed one of her heels without saying a word, as if she was unaware of the terrified stares surrounding her or perhaps purposefully disobeying them. We were momentarily confused by what she was doing. She then threw the shoe directly at the man across from her in a rapid, violent gesture. He was hit on the side of the head by the heel. Nobody anticipated the sound it produced, not a piercing, fracture or a cry of agony. The thump was muted and sickening. The sort of sound that made your stomach turn in an instant. There was a general coolness in the room. He didn't scream. He took a while to fall. Rather, he froze. His entire body froze, as if he had been struck by a lightning strike. And then, almost in slow motion, he leapt out of his chair, his arms thrashing, plates and glasses tumbling to the ground before he fell with a thud. He struck the ground firmly and began to convulse. It was terrible. Backs of chairs scraped. People let out a gasp. For a moment, someone screamed. Nobody made a move. Nobody was sure what to do. Then we were surrounded by mayhem. A couple hurried forward. Thank God, my fiancée responded right away. She worked as a nurse. Additionally, everything regarding in that instant, she changed. Her expression instantly changed from bewildered to concentrated. She said, "Move the table. Clear this space." Her voice piercing the panic. Waiters rushed to comply. With shaking hands, I handed her the jacket when she turned to face me and said, "Give me your jacket now." Kneeling next to him, she folded the jacket and tucked it under his head to keep it safe. As she checked his breathing, her hands moved with serene precision, observing his seizures, like she was trying to re-establish his consciousness. She continued to murmur to him in a steady, quiet voice. I stood motionless and helpless. I could hardly hear anything else since my heart was beating so loudly. We went from clinking wine glasses to experiencing a violent outburst and a serious medical issue in the blink of an eye. The air seemed to have altered, becoming electrified with incredulity and dense with fear. Around us, silverware was strewn on the floor and chairs were upturned. Some made an effort to assist. Others simply stood in disbelief. Some were filming with their phones out. That still irritates me. Not everything that happened to us was tragic. The spectacle was consuming us. But there she was, my fiancée, determined and driven. She continued to gently hold the man's shoulders down, while keeping an eye on his breathing and protecting his head off the tile floor. She had never looked like that to me. It seemed as though pandemonium gave her the energy to be more calm and human, and I simply stood there feeling completely shaken. After what seemed like a lifetime, but probably no more than 10 minutes, the paramedics finally showed up. In some way, everything seemed even more serious as soon as they entered the room, wearing their medical equipment. Bizarre. The chamber had a spooky red glow from the flashing lights outside. They were on the go. One of them gave my fiancée a nod and requested a brief rundown of the events. Though her gaze never left the youngster lying there, she handed it to them succinctly and moved aside to allow. She was not tackled. She was not screamed at. She simply stood amid a strange silence, shaking and motionless. Although some appeared to want to step in, there was a noticeable sense of anxiety in the air, as if nobody wanted to start another unexpected explosion. I seemed to recall seeing a hint of her face. It was no longer anger. Perhaps it was numbness, remorse, or something colder and deeper. The whole experience was a terrifying demonstration of how easily things can go wrong. I stood there with that same indefatigable question in my mind, while the paramedics attended to the man. What took place? What could cause someone to lose their temper like that in front of strangers? What had he said or done to provoke such a reaction? The worrying persisted even after he was hauled away. The night had broken into something ragged and hideous. At last, my fiancée turned to face me, her hands trembling a little from the adrenaline. I could see it when her eyes locked with mine. That same question, that same uneasiness, that I was unable to articulate. It was time to leave, and we both knew it. We made our silent payment and left without a word. The wind hit us with a weird sense of comfort as we entered the chilly night air, yet the sensation remained. It heightened it, if anything, for a while. We walked in quiet, outside. Everything was as usual. Street lamps flashing, automobiles in the distance, quiet streets. However, something had changed within. It was more than just getting out of the restaurant. We had the impression that we were carrying some of it with us. What sort of relationship were they in? I kept wondering. What suffering had accumulated behind closed doors to cause such a violent and public outburst? It had been more than just weight on that heel. It had transported free. And I was forced to face the horrifying reality at that very time. Relationships can deteriorate from the inside out, even if they appear to be completely fine on the surface. The night turned into more than just a recollection. It turned into a sort of warning, a stern, icy reminder that sometimes one step can separate disaster from love. What started off as a romantic celebration has devolved into a tumultuous jumble of suffering and uncertainty. Nevertheless, we remained together during it all. Sometimes, years later, we chuckle at how ridiculous it all is. The unexpectedness, the drama, and the terror. But there's a silent comprehension underneath the laughing. We witnessed something genuine and unadulterated that evening. Not everything in the world is lovely. It's not always easy to forecast people. And sometimes the lessons that chill you to your core are the most crucial. I'm Manuel, and I promise you that the tale I'm going to share is true. It started off as a casual get-together, just like any other Friday night. However, it swiftly turned into something for which none of us was ready. We were a close-knit community. Veronica, Oliver, Moshes, Victor, and me. We had a routine every Friday. After the week, get together at Moshes's house, hang out in his basement, eat pizza, and watch a movie or two while joking and relaxing. Our tiny sanctuary was Moshes's basement. Its luxurious couches gave off an air of lived-in comfort that almost engulfed you. Like a shrine to geekdom, the wall was dominated by a huge TV, and the shelves were filled with video games and DVDs. That collection could only have been assembled by a true cinephile. Moshes welcomed us with a broad smile and a flash of enthusiasm in his eyes when we arrived that evening. "You people held up a hard drive and stated, 'I'm going to love this. discovered this extremely rare series, which was never made, available on Netflix. We refer to it as Midnight Visions. We looked at each other curiously. I inquired, "What's it about?" Moshe simply shrugged, his smile never going away. The classic Moshe's response was, "Kind of hard to explain. It's experimental, you'll see." He wasn't pressed by us. After grabbing our pizza and settling into the couches, he pressed the play button. The opening scene of the first episode had a bunch of friends, ironically, quite similar to us, hanging out at a house that remarkably resembled Moshe's. The amount of individuals, the type of couch, and the ambient lighting are all the same. They were joking and laughing, and everything was informal. Then, however, something changed. The characters became depressed. They were clearly concerned by what they saw on television. However, as viewers, we only witnessed their reactions and never saw what it was. In a matter of seconds, their faces changed from laughter to perplexity to pure dread. It was quite unnerving. Victor joked to lighten the mood as Moshe's, Oliver, and I leaned in to try to piece it together. As expected, Veronica had fallen asleep and was cuddled up with a throw blanket on the far side of the couch. We observed a pattern as the events progressed. In each, a different set of pals lived in various houses, but the result was always the same. Their lives would be invaded by something invisible. An intruder. There would be chaos, but it was subtly first. Creeping dread. And every episode would cut away right before the last character was killed, ending suddenly. No resolution, off screen. By the end of the third episode, Veronica woke up and went to the restroom. Her face was eerily pale when she returned. As she talked, her hands shook. She said, "I think we should stop watching this." We chuckled uncomfortably, thinking she was simply having a bad dream, but her eyes said otherwise. We nevertheless decided to take a break and went to the kitchen to get additional beverages. Ethan, sorry, I meant Oliver, gazed at us with a tight expression as he drank cola and debated the series in a half-hearted manner. Victor sneered, "Guys, have any of you noticed anything weird?" There was a pause, and we exchanged glances. "Come on, man," I replied, half joking. "Yeah, the show sucks." "No, I mean the houses in the episodes. They look a lot like mine," Oliver muttered in a hushed voice. Moshe's most likely edited it himself. It has the scent of one of his complex practical jokes. The fourth episode started, and the uneasiness in the room tripled. But this time it was different. The group of friends on screen, the same number as US, the same seating arrangement, looked exactly like us, not just similar, identical. Moshe's didn't deny it, but he also didn't confirm it, and his sly smile wavered just a little. Nevertheless, we convinced ourselves it was a stunt, because that's what we wanted to believe. The doppelgangers were watching TV on screen, looking visibly tense, when they heard a noise, a thud, then footsteps, just like we had minutes earlier, and then right on cue thud. This time it was real in our house, and we sat frozen, trying to figure out whether the sound had come from the speakers or somewhere upstairs. It didn't help that the audio of the show was purposefully mixed a blur. That line. We stared in stunned silence down to the scuff mark on the wall by the staircase in the old game console in the corner. "I'll check it out," Oliver replied, attempting to seem courageous, and he disappeared up the stairs while we listened, each second seeming to last an hour. A few minutes later, he returned with his eyebrows raised and said, "Nothing. The wind, most likely." "Yeah, most likely," Moshe said, forcing a laugh, but with a crack in his voice. None of us wanted to be the first to suggest turning it off, but we went back to the couch. The fifth and final episode began, and the events that followed chilled our blood. The characters, who were once more mirror images of ourselves, sat watching Midnight Visions and talked about how the episodes were beginning to resemble their lives, exactly like ours, and how the show was feeding off of them and us. The illusion was broken, and it became clear that this was us and not a series. The revelation that it wasn't just fantasy, that it was reflecting, that it was now alive, sent a chill through the room. Moshes pressed pause, and the screen froze on our mirror. Selms. He got up slowly, his smile gone, and he appeared different, solemn, almost blank. The room fell into a tight silence. Then the sounds resumed, footsteps, a creak of doors upstairs, a louder, closer sound, and a mutter that sounded like someone saying secrets out of sight. "Is this still a part of your prank?" My voice cracked, as I inquired, and Moshes just stared at us with a weird gleam in his eye before picking up the remote and bringing up the home screen, which was not Netflix, even though it appeared to be. I asked, my voice shaking as fear tightened my hold on me with every breath. "What is this?" Moshes turned slowly, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. "Welcome to my movie," he said, laughing. The interface was strange, the titles weren't shows we'd ever heard of, and the language was jumbled. "This isn't Netflix," Veronica whispered. A hollow, icy laugh reverberated off the walls. "And you're the stars of the night." Panic struck us at once, and that laugh, which had once been familiar, had turned into something monstrous. Before any of us could move, the basement was plunged into complete darkness. The faint sound of approaching footsteps and the metallic clank of a door closing were the only sounds to break the silence. "Moshes," Veronica called weakly, but he was gone. Frightened and confused, we scurried through the darkness, bumping into furniture and one another in our search for the exit. Lungs. The TV abruptly turned back on, but what we saw chilled us to the bone. We were imprisoned in the basement, our faces white and terrified, and a hooded figure was creeping closer behind us in the darkness. "No, no, no, no," the person said. I muttered, "This isn't happening." Oliver added in a hoarse voice, "It's just like the episodes. Run." He let out a startled yell. I ran toward the far corner of the basement, looking for a way out desperately, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, my breath coming in shallow, frantic gasps, my friends screaming behind me, their voices growing distant and distorted. But we tried, God, we tried, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked tight. There were no windows. There was no escape. Then, one by one, the screams grew louder, agonized, and then, one by one, they stopped. A terrible silence descended. Then, there was a creak. The storage room door opened slowly, and I looked up, thinking it was Oliver, but it wasn't. His face was pale, his head lolled unnaturally, his eyes were lifeless. I ducked into a small service door and crawled into a small storage room, slamming the thin wooden panel shut behind me. Looked behind me, and Moshes was there, behind him, smiling, holding Oliver's body in his hands like a hideous puppet. "Is there space for two in there, friend?" he asked, voice low and gleefully deranged. A jolt of terror shot through me, but something else sparked, too, adrenaline. I was unable to freeze, not right now. I had to do something. I screamed and threw myself at him, attempting to seize the camera that was draped over his shoulder. Use it as a weapon, perhaps I could harm him, leave, and obtain assistance. However, Moshes was more powerful than he appeared, much more powerful. He grabbed me in the middle of my stride and flung me forcefully, pulling me back into the open basement. My pals were there, tethered, bleeding, and scared, when the lights flickered back on. They looked on helplessly as Moshes towered over me, and I struggled. Now the camera was aimed directly at my face. He uttered the words, "I hope your reactions are worth it," with a menacing grin. "We'll have a little more fun, because you're the last to pass away. Turn your sister's world to ash. You're the star now. When we're done, we'll visit her." "No," I cried, my anger and fear bursting. I struggled to stand up, thrashing my fists. But he kept hitting me until I was stunned and on the ground. Hot tears mixed with the blood that trickled down my face. The world spun around me, blurring my eyesight. My limbs refused to react. How did this happen? We were just a bunch of pals laughing in this very room hours ago. I was inches away from death now. Next break. I was brutally kicked in the side of the head, which caused me to lose consciousness. Darkness began to creep in. My eyelids sagged. In an attempt to resist, I was unable to hold on. The world dimmed. Then there was light. I awoke in a hospital bed, my body battered and suffering, my head bandaged. Around me, machines beeped steadily. I was alive, but I could hardly move. There was a policeman sitting close by. They discovered me asleep in Moshe's basement, with Oliver's body next to me, the others still tied up in the corner, scared, but alive. Moshe's gone, a manhunt in progress, and it should have ended there. You're safe now, he murmured quietly. However, a few days later, I got an email from an anonymous account with a link instead of a message. I clicked it, and the video was there. Moshe's had edited everything into a full-length horror film, and there we were, my friends and I, screaming, bleeding, and terrified. Every second of the film was polished as if it were part of some twisted submission to a film festival. And there was a note at the end. Oliver makes poor choices. It wasn't ideal, but you and your friends lived up to the role. Bravo, buddy. I looked at the screen, my heart racing. It was the last chapter of Midnight Visions, but this time we were the main characters. I forwarded the video to law enforcement. They backed it up with our claims and proof from the location. Moshe's was apprehended shortly after being discovered close to the border. It was done. Oliver had left, however. Justice was at last being done. In his twisted serial. We weren't just another episode. We were the conclusion. As a team, we had made sure that evil wouldn't roll credits without suffering the repercussions and had lived through our darkest nightmare.